This is the Aniya Switch from BSUN, and there are two things I really love about it. First is the price, which works out to only 45 cents per switch. I wanted to lead with that because it's due to manufacturers like BSUN that 45 cents is the new 65 cents. After all, it wasn't too long ago that the unwritten rule for switch group buys was that custom switches would run you 65 cents per switch. As far as I could tell, this rule dated back to at least 2018, where V1 of the C3 equals tangerines went into group buy. Believe it or not, Telios back then cost only 75 cents per switch. GMK stabilizers were a thing, and Chinese keycap designers had already released a coffee-themed key set. In any event, for several years afterwards, switches cost 65 cents in group buy. Of course, there were exceptions to the rule, but if you go on Geekhack and check out switch ICs, you'll find it still generally holds true. Now that trend has definitely been destroyed in the past year or so due to several newer manufacturers entering the market. But even back in 2021, BSUN was bucking the trend with their BSUN Yacht Pandas, which sold at 55 cents per switch. And now, with releases like their BSUN X and these Aniyas, it's amazing how they can release a really high quality switch for what should be a budget tier price. So let's talk about it right after you annihilate that like button. The Aniya is a slightly long pole linear with a full palm housing and an LY stem. It comes with a 20mm long single stage spring with an actuation force of 42 grams and a bottom out force of 50 grams. And total travel is 3.2mm. Before we go any further, let's take a listen to these switches, which are factory lubed in my normal test setup. Here we go. I have to say there's really something about BSUN switches that just hits different, which brings me to the second thing I love about these switches. It almost feels like regardless of the materials used, BSUN switches have a very similar sensation, for lack of a better word, when typing. I can't quite put my finger on it, but I mentioned the same thing in my raw switch comparison and some of you agreed in the comments, so I know it's not just in my head. One thing to note about the Aniyas is you can get them either bone dry or factory lubed, and the factory lube is a mix of 205 and 105 on the sliders with dry lube on the stem sliders and the spring. Dashan over at Unikey sent over both lubed and unlubed versions, but unfortunately some USPS employee got their hands on the unlubed package, so I ran one switch through an ultrasonic cleaner to see how the unlubed switch sounded and felt compared to the factory lube. Here's a quick one switch comparison. Stock. I definitely prefer the sound and feel of the factory lubed switch, as the dry switch does have a little bit of a plasticky sound and there's a slight bit of spring crunch. Now, I was informed there were reports of inconsistent factory lube, and I found that in my pack of roughly 90 switches, there were about 2 that were inconsistent with the rest, but they were both under lubed rather than over lubed. And so I wouldn't consider them over lubed by any means, as none of the switches were sluggish, but I went through every switch by hand and I found that the vast majority were very consistent. Your mileage may vary, but I personally think that BSUN's factory lube is good enough that I wouldn't bother opening them up. Now at the end of the day, it's a little hard for me to tell you that you should absolutely pick these switches up, if only because I know most of us are pretty long pulled out. But for 45 cents per switch, you're getting a light actuation long pull linear with a very solid stock experience, at least if you opt for the factory lube. Let me know in the comments if you'd like me to start posting comparison sound tests with other switches in every video or as standalone reels, because in my mind, hearing a switch in its own review isn't too helpful for making informed buying decisions. Anyhow, if you made it this far, you're a real one, so leave me a comment below with the one switch you think is the most popular switch so that I can do sound test comparisons. Check out some more keyboard content here. I'm MakerMods, and I'll catch you in the next video.